Good evening friends, you are most welcome to Think IGNOU channel. Today we are going to discuss Social Anthropology by Maan IGNOU, mane004, in which we are going to discuss gender and society, and our topic is patriarchy and male dominance. Here we are going to make this is the second part, and our heading is sexuality of women and male dominance. Let us begin the topic. The male control over the sexuality of women is considered to be manifestation of patriarchy. This control is exercised by the male within the structure of marriage, family and kinship. Especially in the patrilineal societies like ours in India, the institution of marriage, family and kinship becomes a site for reproducing the patriarchal structure. In the marital alliances, a virgin bride is always desirable. Premarital sex is seen in terms of moral pollution, which is more severe for the women than for the men. It is considered that through the sexual intercourse a woman gets internally polluted, whereas a male only gets external pollution. Internal pollution is related to the pollution of the substance. The concept of substance hold a great importance in maintaining caste distances. Batali 1991, Dubai 2009. The caste hierarchies and distances are maintained through the concept of selective exchange of women to a certain caste or castes. In this way, the sexuality of women gets connected with the larger social structure based on caste. Again, the concept of hypergamy and hypogamy demonstrate a strict control over the female sexuality. Hypergamy to some extent is permitted where a man of higher caste can have union with a woman of a lower caste, but hypogamous unions are strictly prohibited. Even if a woman of higher caste gets entangled with a lower caste male, it can bring serious consequences to both the families. There are numerous such examples where honor killing took place in the name of such unaccepted marital or love affairs or love unions. This exemplifies that the control over the sexuality of women becomes an instrument of reproducing caste hierarchies. This also exemplifies a kind of corporate control over the sexuality of women. In this kind of control, female sexuality gets attached with the honor of an entire village, caste, community or family, and any infringement over the same can bring a lot of dishonor to the entire group. This kind of corporate control over the sexuality of women is also demonstrated by anthropologists like D.N. Mazumdar, who in his monograph named The Himalayan Polyandry on the people of Jaunsar Bawa region of Dehradun documented fraternal polyandrous marriage alliance between a bride and all the brothers of a particular household where the marriage gets solemnized. Here the main issue is related with the right of access to the female sexuality, which by such alliance get restricted to the family or household as a unit. There are other such studies that have documented the marriage alliance of a bride with several brothers. Other studies have also documented that there is an unwritten rule or an accepted practice where after the death of the husband, the widow has to marry her brother's brother, her husband's brother. This can be analyzed in the light of retaining the woman and her children, if any, within the family or lineage, so that the right over the father's property remains within the household or family. This indicates a strong feeling of ownership of women, her labor and reproductive power. The patriarchal mindset is quite well observable in Hindu marriage rituals and relations between the bride and groom's family. A kind of power relation exists between the families of bride and groom. The exchange of gifts and dowry indicates this kind of unequal relationship. A bride is considered to be a financial liability and burden over the groom's family, which must be compensated adequately in order to solemnize the marriage. This undermines the productive work which women generally perform within the household. Household chores are considered to be non-consequential as their labor is considered to be non-productive and taken for granted. Therefore, women are rendered powerless both at the level of production and reproduction. At the level of family, the sexuality of women is under the control of her brothers and fathers. Leela Dubey 2009 explains this with the help of a very general yet powerful observation that of brothers in the context of South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh and Pakistan are provided with the task of keeping an eye on the movement of their sisters. They have the responsibility of protecting their sisters. This kind of responsibility gives them the right to exercise power over the female and dictate their behavior according to their own whims and fancies. There have been several incidents reported where the brothers killed their sisters who were found guilty of illicit love or wanting to marry against the wishes of their parents. Exemplifying cases from Andhra Pradesh, Dubey states that brothers often scold their sisters if they found them standing at the doorstep during the evening, as they considered it to be gesture adopted by the prostitution in order to invite their customers. However, Dubey further compares the situation of control over female sexuality in patrilineal South Asia with that of matrilineal and bilateral Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. She argues that the kinship system based on matrilineality and bilateral concept has greater tolerance and less control over the female sexuality. She argues that in countries like Malaysia and where Islamic influence is seen, there are restrictions on sexual behavior placed on women before marriage, but such restrictions are also placed equally on the men. It is quite common in Indonesia for women to migrate for work to urban centers and leave their husbands behind to look after their land and children. In Thailand, women take to the profession of the prostitution to support their families, but they return to their mainstream and get married after some time. This cannot even be imagined in the context of South Asia. The basic idea that underlies this behavioral attitude pertains to the fact that men are not the users of women's sexuality. Dubey 1998, Dubey 1988, 2000, 2009. Activity: discuss on the issue of sexuality of women depicted in Indian cinema and its impact on the larger society. Discuss on the issue of sexuality of women depicted in Indian cinema and its impact on larger society. Our next heading is historical perspective of women's productive and reproductive roles. The relation of production and reproduction needs to be analyzed historically in order to understand the consolidation of patriarchy. Uma Chakrabarti in her essay on Brahminical patriarchy in early India tries to understand this relation of production and reproduction during historical periods. She has based her analysis largely on prehistoric, protohistoric and historical accounts and evidences that throw some light on the dimension of women's role both in production and reproduction. Her argument starts with the contention that in the hunting and food gathering stages, women's role was not restricted only in terms of reproduction, but they also played active role in the food gathering and also sometimes in hunting, which she argues is evident in cave paintings of Bhimbetka and other archaeological sites in central India. In many such paintings, women are depicted wearing some sort of headgear depicting power and authority and are shown taking part during hunting activities. The reproductive role of women was also considered important since they were considered as life givers and thus having close association with the events of life and death. These beliefs place women in some sort of mystical and supernatural space which is in sync with the evidence found related with the cult of Mother Goddess. During the Indus Valley civilization, the position of women and the emergence of patriarchy cannot be established based on the evidence such since the in situ evidence is not supported by written documents as they are not yet decisively deciphered. However, there are evidences of class formation which are depicted and present in the form of rural and urban centers, citadels, surplus green stocks, etc. Presence of female figurines, mother goddess icons, and dancing girl statues can be seen as pointing toward the important role of women in relation to reproduction, but nothing can be said with conviction regarding the gender relations. It was with the coming of Aryans that the real consolidation of patriarchy and male dominance took place. It is intended in the early Vedic literature that the Aryans had to fight with the indigenous people of the land. In this fight, they conquered their cattle, land, and women. This is the first ever historical evidence of women taken as captives by the Aryans. These women then were assigned different roles that related with serving the Aryan race and were also used as gift items, thus depicting a control over their sexuality. Later on, various texts including the Arthashastra and Manu Smriti outlines the behavior of the behavior of women and laid down rules for controlling their productive and reproductive capacities. There are written evidences that are sufficient to show that the state also had some control over the reproduction power or reproductive power and sexuality of women. In this context, it was laid down that the king can punish a woman for her adulterous behavior. This state control was guided by the principle that the sexuality of women needs to be controlled, and this controlling power lies mainly with the husband after the woman is married, and if the husband is not able to control her, then the state can take action against such culprit. This also had some effect on the role of production of women. With such strict control over her sexuality, she was now mainly confined to the domestic sphere of life. He also the kind of importance here also the kind of importance that must be accorded to a woman's productive role was absent. Chakravarti 1993. Patrilocality, matrilateral kinship and patriarchy. Kinship structures form an important part of social organization. Kinship structure of a society decides and ensures the membership of people into various groups. Like in a patrilineal kinship structure, a son remains a member of the family of orientation, whereas the daughter has to leave her natal house and move to the family of her affinal kins after marriage. She becomes a member of her husband's patrilineally. It is through these membership rules that the society perpetuates itself within a definite structure. These kinship structures have a special bearing on the perpetuation of patriarchal social structures. The rule of residence after marriage is an important reflection of the principle of kinship. Leela Dubey has rightly underscored the relation between rules of residence and kinship principles when she says residence is a material as well as an ideological expression of principle of kinship. In the patrilocal form of residence, a couple after marriage resides with the family of the groom. This kind of residential arrangement is found in large parts of India. It is based on the basic premise that the daughter is not a permanent member of her natal house and she has to move out after marriage. This really has an important bearing on her productive and reproductive capacities and autonomy. It also influences the rules of inheritance and daughter share in parental property. It is generally argued against the daughter's claim over her parental property that if she gets a share of the property, then it will eventually belong to her husbands and her in-laws. Also, the notion of payment of dowry dilutes her claim over the property since it is believed that the dowry is in lieu of her share in the property. The idea of patriarchy entails that a daughter has to sever all ties with her natal house upon marriage. Her in-laws' house is generally a new place where she has limited access and control over productive resources. Her sexuality is also controlled by her husband and in-laws in form of demands placed on her to give birth to a male child. Dubai 2009. As in the case with patriarchy, Karine Kapadia, in her study among the Brahmins and non-Brahmins of Arulur village in Tamil Nadu, points towards the institution of matrilateral kinship and argues that with the changing socio-economic context, matrilateral kinship is falling into disrepute and is replaced by patrilineal kinship and prevalence of dowry during marriage. This in turn perhaps leads to male dominance and lower status of women in the society. Kapadia explains that among the non-Brahmin caste of Arulur village in the matrilineal kin in the form of mother's brother MB and mother's brother's son MBS holds immense importance in the life of women and her children. MYB mother's younger brother and MBS mother's brother's son are considered as prospective grooms for women's daughter. Mother's brother is also obliged to give expensive gift during the life cycle rituals of his sister's children. This ceremonial gift is known as Sar, which is considered to be a replacement for women's share in her parental property. Thus, it is both obligatory and women's share in true sense in contrast with the institution of dowry and stridhan practiced among the patrilineal groups. Among the Brahmins of Arulur, the patrilineal kings hold more importance since matrilineal kings do not provide prospective grooms for marriage. Women are married to complete strangers as compared to the mother's brother's son or mother's younger brother in case of non-Brahmins. This accounts for forming new relations among the in-laws as compared to more familiar relation in the latter case. However, with the passage of time, even among the non-Brahmins, matrilineal kins are losing their importance and dowry is gaining ground since a dowry marriage is considered as high status marriage and thus people are keen to make it a part of their symbolic capital. This has far-reaching implications for women's subordination and male dominance in the society as the negotiation and practice of dowry makes bride's family subordinate to the groom's family. Kapadia 1990, 1993, 1994. This metamorphosis from bride price to dowry in marital alliances is also evident among the Gonds of Vidarbha in Maharashtra. The reason for such a transformation can be located in increased interaction of this tribal group with the larger society where dowry is the norm. It is a result of peering pressure. It is a result of peer pressure and a fear of ridicule that is generated if things are not according to the wishes of dominant social groups in an area. This again bears certain consequences for female subjugation and subordination. Khatri et al. 2012. Our next heading is marriage pattern and the institutionalization of patriarchy and male dominance. Patriarchy and male dominance as related twin concepts are reflected in the institution of marriage. Marriages in India are mostly solemnized in the form of some kind of arrangements between the bride givers and the bride takers. In such arranged marriages, the consent of the boy and girl are not that important as that of their household heads or patriarchs. This is also a reflection of patriarchal mindset. Kate Millett, in her work on sexual politics, has tried to define patriarchy in two ways. First, male dominating female. Second, older males dominating younger male and female. Therefore, the notion of arranged marriage is a conceptual outcome of the older males dominating younger male and females on the question of choosing their prospective brides and grooms. Dipankar Gupta, while analyzing the Hindu marriage pattern, states that the notion of arranged marriage is still the norm in modern India, whether in the rural or urban setting. We are all aware of the consequences in the form of khab and caste panchayat dictates that a young couple has to face in the event of marrying by his or her own choice. Gupta further argues that such arranged marriages are based on the notion of inequality between the bride givers and bride takers. A kind of hierarchy set based on the notion of male dominance, which is evident in the form of bride takers having a superior status than the bride givers. This male dominance and inequality gets reflected in certain marriage ceremonies like Pau Puja, worshipping the feet of the grooms, which the father of the bride giver has to perform. This reflects a kind of ritual hierarchy. The notion of male dominance also gets reflected through the Kanyadan, giving away the virgin girl to the groom's family in the form of a gift complex. This is considered to be the gift of the highest order that cannot be matched by any other kind. This sets a hierarchical relationship between the bride giver and bride taker. The two categories of bride givers and bride takers, as outlined by Dipankar Gupta, can also be understood in the form of institutionalization of patriarchy and male dominance, where not only the male that is dominating and having a superior status, but the female of the bride taker's side, especially the mother-in-law of the bride, becomes an agency of negotiating power in the household. This is an excellent example of how patriarchy and male dominance is so ingrained in the social structure that it takes different forms to get manifested through power sharing on the issue of production and reproduction. The very process of giving birth to a male child places the women on the bride taker's side. This is also the reason that even women long for a male child. The control of the mother-in-law over the bride's household activities a clear manifestation of her acquired status of a bride taker, Gupta 2001. At the last we will discuss the summary. Summary part is, here we will discuss, it is now important to have a panoramic view of the twin concept of patriarchy and male dominance. To start with, this unit deals with the present issue of the kind of treatment that is given to women in our society. The unit opens with a debate on the position of women in terms of their rights and privileges. Recent examples of molestation and property inheritance rules become the backdrop through which patriarchal structure can be understood. We also discussed that how state acts as an extension of the general patriarchal mindset in the form of property inheritance rules and acts that are to some extent skewed towards to male members of the society. The next section of this unit tried to explain how patriarchy as a social organization principle emerged at the first place. This question has been answered by different schools of the feminist thought. Liberal feminists focused more on the issue of individual rights of female and are of the view that women can only be liberated from the clutches of patriarchy through the process of individual participation in the public and political domain. However, this view has been criticized on the grounds that it does not explain the origin of patriarchy and is individual centric, thus neglecting the structured design of patriarchy. The shortcomings of liberal feminism are taken care of by the Marxist feminist thought. According to the Marxist feminist or the Marxist feminism, the world historic defeat of women began with the advent of private property. Marxists focused more on the issue of relations of production and how women are placed within this structure. However, they are criticized for just adding women to their already existing theory of class struggle and have nothing new to offer in terms of the establishment of patriarchy. They are also criticized on the grounds that patriarchy and male dominance was present even before the advent of private property, and it is the basic nature of women being considered as a basic form of exchange that gave birth to the control of their productive and reproductive capacities. The control over the sexuality of women form the basis for the radical and revolutionary feminist scholar. They are of the view that it is the psychological and social meaning that is accorded to the notion of motherhood that brought about the control over the female sexuality. It is the social extension of the role of motherhood to child rearing that brought about their confinement to the four walls of the house and thus control over their productive and reproductive capacities. Then we moved on to understand that how in the context of India patriarchy became established. In this section we started with the example and evidence from the hunting gathering stage and moved on to the Vedic and post-Vedic period, where state also became an instrument for upholding patriarchy and male dominance. Further, we understood that how kinship structures in the form of patrilocality and the Hindu marriage patterns have inbuilt patriarchal structures. This has been explained with the help of certain examples. In a nutshell, it can said that one has to be very observant in order to decipher more such models based on patriarchy and male dominance. Thank you very much.